Hello there, everybody, and welcome to the Train Crash podcast. As you've seen from the title, this one is the Great Model Railway Livery Debate. Yes, it's very nearly a Chris Eden Green title, that is, but argue that's one of the things that started this thought process between Luke and myself off, really. And it's something that obviously captivates the real world of railways, but equally the model world as well. But do you want me to tell you what liveries don't matter on? That's our latest range of Train Crash Models kits. Yes, there's a link to the eBay shop in the description below. Please do feel free to go and check them out. It will mean a lot if you guys just add a look, really. If you're not interested, then cool. But if there is some things that do interest you, buy them, and you'll be supporting us, which is quite nice. But equally, a like and a comment below, and you watching is more than enough for us. Anyway, we'll actually get into what we want to talk about, and that is model railways and the liveries that are put onto the models. Now, every year, manufacturers come out with big catalogues, and there's this locomotive in that livery, and there's always a subsection of people who always say, "Oh, I wish that this model was coming back in this livery." And sometimes those manufacturers listen. Look at the SECR C-Class rather from Bachmann, which has had a second or third run in the SECR lined green livery, which is really ornate. And those pre-grouping modelers who collect those SECR locomotives, let's face it, they are spoilt for choice at the moment. You've got the P-Class, the H-Class, and obviously the aforementioned C-Class. So the pre-grouping liveries, certain ones are quite well represented, the SECR is, but certain others aren't so much. What do you think about like pre-grouping liveries within like the model railway scene, Luke?
I think we often see pre-grouping liveries released as exclusive collector's editions in quite limited runs. Now, personally, I don't actually model pre-grouping, but I think they are still very attractive to look at, and I think they definitely do sell very well. You just have to look at Bachmann's recent J72. I think it was in the Northeastern Railway kind of green livery, and that was only exclusive to the Collector Club, and it sold very well so far. And I think with it being such an ornate, complex livery, manufacturers may sometimes stay away from them. Maybe sometimes they attach a higher price point to them. So this can be seen with the Caledonian good jumbo goods class. I think the 812 class that Bachmann are producing in association with the NRM and Rails, I believe, and that's the Caledonian Railway livery. I think is £15 or £20 more expensive than the BR Black liveries. So I think the complexity of the liveries is something that's maybe feared, or it's not as easy for manufacturers to do, especially when it comes to designing and the extra research necessary to make the livery. So they definitely come with maybe a higher price point for the people that want to buy it, but also a higher kind of cost to create them.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that the people who model pre-grouping have got my eminent amount of respect, just because of the lack of photographs and lack of ready to run that you guys have actually got. I'll be forever in awe of what you can do. But one thing that can't be ignored is that when those pre-grouping liveries are released, so we'll take the SECR livery because that's quite a popular one at the moment. It appears that most people collect that livery but don't model that pre-grouping company. Bachmann have released their Birdcage, the SECR Birdcage coach, and that really hasn't sold as well as, say, Monsell coaches do or anything like that. They're still being put through clearing and things like that years later, and they've been sitting on shop shelves and things like that, which suggests that people are more into collecting those ornate liveries rather than modelling that specific period. But yeah, I think that all in all, pre-grouping liveries are obviously very ornate, and the price will have to go up with that. And I think that sometimes pre-grouping modelers can kind of feel almost left behind when like pre-grouping liveries are ignored by the ready-to-run manufacturers.
Yeah, but when you look at the amount of people that model pre-grouping liveries or the pre-grouping era, it's often quite small, and they're often kind of kind of hardcore models, if you like, because there isn't that wider RTR support in general. And the RTR support that does kind of go for those pre-grouping kind of prototypes is often chosen because it survived a long period of time. It survived into kind of grouping and then nationalisation. So just look at the Terriers. Some of them carry the LBSCR kind of browny creamy livery, and they also carry all the way through to BR Black. So I think the whole kind of pre-grouping market is also widely under-supported with RTR, and maybe if we see an increase in the kind of ready-to-run wagons, and even maybe some ready-to-run resin buildings from like the Backburn or Hornby or Oxford, that would maybe encourage for there to be more support in that kind of era, which would probably have a multiplier effect onto increasing the amount of liveries we see in those kind of locos and era.
Definitely. And something else that I think we'd like to discuss, just a little bit of a caveat before we go into this. We are both industrial modelers, so this is just going to take a bit of an industrial tone for a second. But something that as a industrial modeler, I sometimes feel that ready-to-run locomotives are released in quite ornate liveries as is. So we'll take things like the Hornby Packet, in the Huntley and Palmer's livery, the Manchester Shipping Company livery as well. Quite ornate liveries, and they're not generic enough that people can adapt. But then in the second run, they had the Lillistall, is it? The Stone Company, the all black one.
Yeah.
And I've seen so much done with those. I've modified mine to be NCB. You've got one.
I left mine in plain black and just as a generic contracting loco on loan to the distillery. And also because it's so plain, it just fits in so many different settings. It feels like a load that's quite free to go between layouts and dioramas.
But something that so that's quite generic. That's just a generic, and not that much is going on with that livery. It's a lovely livery, but bar the silver smoke box door dart, there's very little really in the terms of finishing touches as such to the locomotive. A lot of industrial locomotives rather, were given lining at points in their lives as kind of like a show of care from the people who ran the locomotives and looked after them. So I think maybe some generic lined locomotives will go down very well as well within the industrial sphere.
Yeah, and you can kind of see that. I don't know if it's intentional from Hornby, but the latest, I think it's at Port of Bristol, Port of London Authority, Peckett is kind of like a blue, unnamed, kind of lightly lined loco, and that's definitely gone down really well. But other industrial liveries that tend to go down really well are also kind of works liveries. So the works green Peckett's, the works green Rustons, all sold out incredibly quickly. And if you look on the second-hand market for one now, you're gonna have to part with quite a bit of cash to get one.
Certainly. And obviously, the way works liveries came about was if the person buying the locomotive from the obviously locomotive builder didn't specify a livery, they just got put out in the generic livery for that company. So obviously, Ruston had a different one to what Peckett did, who had a different version to Kerr Stewart. So yeah, there's so many different sorts of these works liveries, but they are so nice to look at. I particularly like the Peckett ones. I think that sits really well on the W4 and the B2. And yeah, so there's definitely a lot of modelers who like those works liveries. I'm just a little bit jealous that you managed to get hold of the works livery Ruston, and I could not. But yeah, the green liveries do look really nice, and they do tend to be lined, and people like lining as well. And that's something else that I think people underestimate, is how much people like a little bit of lining on a locomotive.
Yeah, and so, as you said earlier, the work screens were just kind of pumped out as if the livery was unspecified. So they could really suit any location around the country for a wide variety of industries. So again, that kind of ambiguity seems to sell quite well. And I've seen people that have kind of mainland layouts, and they still choose these less specific liveries, the works liveries, to run just because they don't tie them down to a certain region or even era. And I think people really like the freedom that comes with it.
Definitely, and I think that was some. I don't want to call it criticism, but that was something that people were talking about when the initial batch of packets came out. Obviously, you had the Manchester shipping canal, liveried packet, which was the darker green one with the lining, and the Huntley and Palmer's livery. A lot of people were complaining that those sort of locomotives, they're not. Chances are, those two locomotives aren't going to sit in a biscuit factory layout or a canal side layout. So the people will be operating them wrong, but that's hit and miss whether you particularly care about that. But something that I'd like to just mention with you, just bringing this onto a more mainline route, is what do you think about photographic grey locomotives? We've discussed this on a Novelty or Not podcast. A link will be on the top right of the screen if we can remember to do it. But yeah, so what do you think about photographic grey liveries on locomotives?
I think photographic grey liveries really attract collectors, because realistically, when would you see a photographic grey livery loco actually running? Now, I'm not aware actually of many locos that have been produced in photographic grey liveries. I know the Helsian Beta Garrett have, and I think the livery is quite smart. But again, I think its scope for operation is incredibly limited, and is kind of sold as more of an exclusive collector's item. Though that may not be specifically branded as such, it does seem to attract kind of the glass cabinet kind of modelers, if you like. Mm-hmm. I'd rather go for a livery that's more functional, more practical, so the BR Black or something like that. But I kind of see it attracting the market, but kind of as long as it's in a smaller production batch, I think.
Yeah, I think I was speaking to somebody in my local model shop who buys predominantly when they're available locomotives in photographic grey, and he says it's because the colour matches, and in his display cabinet, the fact that all the colour matches is really pleasing to him, and that's what he collects for. Is saying that all his fleet are as similar as possible. That's something that he valued within his fleet. So there's obviously, I think that's another thing, isn't it? There's not only modelers who model different eras, different regions, different like focus points, whether that be a branch line, whether that be a industry, whether that be a main line or whatever. You've also got people who don't necessarily run models as such. You just kind of have them sitting in display cabinets, which could maybe describe the SECR liveries that we were discussing earlier, why those sold so well, because they were very ornate. So there's just so many different sides to liveries within model railways that we could talk about them all night, but we're just trying to give like a flavour of the debate really tonight.
Yeah, you make an interesting point as well. It's one I hadn't considered till now, is the kind of getting the paint matches correct, because it's very easy, or it's easier, I should say, to identify BR Black as black. You know, there's lots of different kind of shades and tones of black, I guess, and kind of the different gloss finishes. But at the end of the day, you can very clearly see black, and there's thankfully lots of preserved examples and colour photos of that. But when you go to pre-grouping stuff, which is the liveries that are more neglected, and also some industrial liveries that are also neglected, is there's a distinct lack of colour photographs that make it easy for manufacturers to say, oh yeah, that's that right shade of yellow or blue or green, something like that. And maybe that's a reason that also further complicates trying to produce pre-grouping liveries, and it's kind of a manufacturer's best guess. And when you get, let's say, the Hornby and the Rails Terriers side by side in their pre-grouping liveries, you can tell there's difference in the shade and the colours, and so you know it's got to be really hard to be able to produce a livery accurately, and so it might fall under criticism of some modelers as a result of that.
Yeah, I mean that goes for any livery really, anything, any livery at all, because BR Blue is one that's quite often heavily debated, and it was actually something that was a relatively big thing for certain people with regards to the new Hornby Hush Hush. They've released some painting samples for that, so like the CAD images with the paint on them, for like where to apply. I believe it goes into the factory, where to apply decals and things. But yeah, some people weren't happy that they didn't believe the shade was right and various things. It's a thing that's also levelled at teak coaches as well, quite commonly. But yeah, I think sometimes people can get very what's it about the correct shade, and the fact of the matter is the colours differed in real life. And I think that's something people should note, especially like the BR Blues, each depot appeared to have a slightly different shade of blue when they were touching locomotives up and things like that. So yeah, I think it's an interesting one to discuss the reliability, if you get me, of colours, the consistency.
And different lighting and different, weather conditions would affect how the colours kind of stood out and looked, and the finish the locos had. So something I think we can agree on is sometimes kind of the gloss finish on locos is a little bit unnecessary.
Yeah, I'm with you on that.
Yeah, I mean, I like it. Well, I say I like it. I think it suits it when they produce kind of models of preserved engines or museum exclusive engines. I think that's when a slightly glossy finish is good, and that's when it kind of suits it. But otherwise, I think it's a big no-no for me.
And they're relatively difficult to shift, from what I understand, because they did a gloss collection for Sir Nigel Gresby, where Hornby had a lot of their like top end models. I believe they had Book Law in its A1 form. As part of the collection, you could buy it as a set of 4. So I had an A1, A3, A4, and P2, I think, just off the top of my head. And you could buy them separately as well. Oh, thank you. But Book Law was like on sale at Hatton's for like 100-ish quid, when like the RTR was the RRP was a lot higher. So maybe those gloss finishes are a little bit more difficult to shift to like modelers who are going to run it on a layout.
Yeah, and I guess it would make that loco stand out in kind of the wrong way. I guess if it's not looking in line with all the other locos. So another point I'd like to raise is kind of the numbering on you get on locos. So in double O and N and some of O gauge as well, you buy a loco and it comes to you, pre-numbered. You don't really get a say in the number you'd like to see on it. Now this is a little bit different in the American HO market and also the O gauge market, where they will supply the loco unnumbered. They'll put it in BR blue or BR black or whatever livery it comes in, and then they'll give you a set of transfers, and then you get to decide the numbering you want to. Now, I guess the downside with this is that modelers are maybe less confident, because chances are, if you're not going to be confident weathering a loco, you're probably not going to be confident numbering a loco as well. So I guess it could detract some modelers from buying that kind of stuff. But I'd definitely like to see it moving more into the British double O gauge market. Would you buy an unnumbered loco, do you think?
Yeah, it kind of comes back to that plain liveries that we mentioned earlier, is that you can do so much with it. I'm quite fortunate that I've had quite a bit of experience with decals. Don't get it right all the time, but yeah, I've got a decent amount of experience with them, so I'll be pretty confident in like redecaling a locomotive if, say, it came in all black. And I think there is a market for that, and people do tend to call for it as well on the likes of RM Web. There's a way to cut prices a little bit and allow people to like have different members of the fleet. But yeah, I think maybe it does put manufacturers off having to do a big production run of them, in case people don't want to renumber and relivery locomotives, so not having to apply, say, BR crests or whatever, or BR numbers and things like that. Maybe that puts people off, as you've mentioned.
Yeah, I imagine it could do, but I think it would also give a lot of modelers a lot of freedom. And I think once people got over the maybe initial fear of numbering their own loco, or if the manufacturers did do a small release of kind of pre-numbered locos, then I think they could be a success. I know I, for one, would certainly like to buy one, and I've renumbered a couple of my own locos, and it's not a problem. to buy the numbers, remove transfers, fit new transfers, re-weather that kind of area. But I would certainly like to see numbers to be able to provide, because if you think about some classes like the 4MT standard tanks, they worked in right at the top of Scotland, right down to kind of the tip of Cornwall-ish area. They ran in the southern region and Scottish region and everywhere in between. And a lot can be said for a lot of other standard classes, and even some
Definitely.
Great Western Panniers ended up in Scotland. That's a big kind of range and scope. And so I bought a standard class 4MT tank, and it was numbered 80092, and that was allocated to Brighton shed. And I wanted it to kind of run on the Loch Tay line in northern Scotland. So I renumbered it to 80126. But the thing is, though, is that there aren't really any Scottish numbered standard class tanks out there available. And so it would be, well, there's a little bit of rivet counter coming out of me to renumber that. But I'd have liked it if I would have been able to buy that from Bachmann and just renumbered it or numbered it to whatever I wanted straight away.
It's saving you a job, isn't it? It's saving you the fact you have to kind of take the decals off. And maybe this is somewhat of a call for like fictionalized liveries. So like you mentioned standard classes. So a lot of the standard classes based at the Western region got painted green, and when they got transferred elsewhere, they still carried the green lining, which a lot of locomotives didn't have unless they were like big express mainline locomotives. So is there maybe a call for maybe fictional liveries to apply to certain models? I'm not saying an A4 to be put in NCB with wasp stripes on both ends. Or am I?
I mean,
no, I'm not saying that. But maybe
that would look pretty good, though.
But is there maybe a time for like fictional liveries? Because a lot of locomotives that are produced and ready to run are based on prototypes left in real life, and as such, quite often the locomotive that is produced at some point in its production run will get given the running number of the preserved example. Save for the Peckett still haven't done any of the Hornby still haven't done any of the preserved Pecketts. But preserved locomotives are a big selling point. I'm actually deviating slightly away from the fictional. Oh, sorry. But I'm deviating slightly away from the fictional liveries just for the moment. We'll come back to them in a second because that's almost a debate in itself. But what do you think about preserved liveries on locomotives?
I think absolutely. I think if there's a class of that, if there's a member of that class that has been preserved, they should absolutely produce one that's been preserved because they'd be such big sellers. And I recently, a couple of months back, I renumbered a standard class 4MT tank to 80136, which is preserved on the North Yorkshire Railway for a friend, because he volunteers there, and he would have loved to buy one, ready out of the box. But I think they're quite expensive like that. But again, I definitely would like to see more preserved examples, just because I think it would maybe attract a wider market, because a lot of people that maybe volunteers or enthusiasts of that particular loco or class or heritage railway, or even want to model a heritage railway, because I do see that quite a lot at the moment, I feel, and so they may be interested in collecting that specific loco, and I think they'd be big sellers, absolutely.
Especially if you did them in like the locomotion models, so that's the NRM's modelling arm. Sorry, the RM. It's going to be the MRM for years until everybody gets used to calling it the Railway Museum rather than the National Railway Museum. But yeah, they did it quite well with like their C1 Atlantics or the C2 Atlantics that they released. They've also done the same for a Class 20 that they've got preserved in York. And yeah, I think when it's made a big show of, and like, so we'll take, for example, DJ models, they're obviously now gone by the wayside, but the 1361s, if you bought a certain model, it was either all of the models or a model of the one that's been preserved, £5 of what you spent on the model went straight to the preservation fund. And I think in this like post-COVID era, obviously preserved railways are really going to be struggling. So maybe that's quite a nice way for both modelers and preservationists to get along together and take a bit of a win from it.
Yeah, it's like a sense of goodwill, isn't it? It does go to help the Heritage Railway sector, which is definitely going to be struggling. But well, linking on to maybe another point, is about for every purchase, money gets donated. Similarly enough, Hornby, a couple of weeks back, announced that they were going to be doing an exclusive run of the GBRF 66. Captain Tom Moore, I think, isn't it? As well as I think they said they're going to do one of the 800s as well. I can't. I'd have to double check that. Great
Western, those are, aren't they?
Yeah, they are. They're maybe 802s. I love that Great Western livery to absolute bits. I think it's awesome. But that's besides the point. And so the fact that they're trying to, keep up to date with very modern liveries as well, aren't they? And get them produced very quickly on a loco that's maybe not the highest detailed or tooling, but they do seem to use the unusual liveries as a really good selling point that other manufacturers may not have, or have the speed to the market, if you like, because I believe that they do the what's it called? They do a coalesce livery. Yeah, they do the Flying Dustman. I was thinking the bin liner then, but that's a nickname for a service that runs near me. The Flying Dustman. They do it's GBRF make lots of different fancy liveries, and they're quite cool ones as well. They're also doing the BR Green one Evening Star. But the 66 647, I think. Or they're doing the one that BR Blue Lives logo on as well. So they're kind of using the novelty, maybe more unique liveries as a selling point for some of their logos.
Definitely. And this is quite a loose link. I can't lie. It's a loose link in my notes, but because of the way I've set up, it's even weaker. Is this maybe a call for fictional liveries?
Now, I think when it comes to fictional liveries, I think some people wouldn't mind seeing some of the older locos put into maybe even pre-grouping liveries, but I think that the fictional liveries really falls well into the hands of industrial modelers, because so many industrial modelers like yourself and I like to make up our own railway companies, our own histories, our own backstories. We don't want to model the Port of London Authority docks. We want to model our own made-up industry, and we want to brand it as we do, and we want to, base it loosely around some stuff, so they would have some continuing logo designs and stuff like that. But we don't want to just buy the models off the shelf and leave them that way. So I think fictional liveries, I guess it kind of links to the plain liveries we'd like to see, kind of just like plain liveries, basic lining, that may not have any actual roots in the prototype, but I think they'd go down a treat with a lot of modelers as well. And also you see a lot of people who aren't industrial modelers are interested in buying industrial locos, and if they aren't tied so kind of strictly into those realistic locations or protocol locations, other people might be more inclined to buy them because they're just less rules about them, if you get what I mean.
Yeah, and it does definitely link back to that initial point that we made. It's quite poetic that we've come almost full circle, in that maybe some generic industrial liveries could be made for some locomotives that got put into industry at some point. Ginties, maybe.
Yeah, I think that could be interesting. Though if I was going to envisage a manufacturer that would be more into that, I'd say Hornby is. Bachmann still seems quite kind of stiff upper lip to me, very prototypical. But Hornby seems to be more in line with the market, producing those wacky, weird 66 liveries that other manufacturers aren't as keen to go in for. And also them kind of saying, hey, let's do a steampunk range. Though it's not for me, it's definitely showing kind of an openness to other ideas. And I guarantee you, those steampunk liveries are all fictional.
Really? um, but yeah, something else that I'd just like to, because Hornby do fictional liveries as is actually on their like the Railroad 040s, the little X pocket rockets. And is there maybe a bit of a market for like a clash between like those pocket 040s and some like pre-grouping liveries? So like we put something out on the Instagram earlier about what liveries people would like to see on Ready to Run Locomotives. So we've had somebody come in with the Midland and Great Northern Joint Railway, which was a beige and yellow, which sounds quite interesting for a livery. But someone else suggested the LMS Blue Grey, which was on the initial Coronation class and things like that. So is there maybe a call for those sort of fictional locomotives as they are, really? Because let's face it, those little pocket rocket 040s are all representations of things, but nothing completely prototypical. So is there maybe a bit of a call for them to go fully down the route of what they've kind of been tiptoeing on as is and just go full steam ahead, LBSC on the side of one of them D-class things to get the LBSC modelers in, or do you think that would just be a move that wouldn't like pay back?
I think there's definitely the call for it, but I think I could also see quite a bit of a clash. So the Hornby, those sort of models are all about budget and being kind of keeping it simple for children, and whether putting an ornate livery onwards would definitely probably increase the price, and it would also maybe make it less robust to maybe chipping or getting dropped on the floor if there's more complex livery on it. But I could definitely see it being popular with other modelers, especially if, and we've talked about this in other podcasts about people liking to collect families of locos, classes of locos, builders of locos, but maybe also liveries of locos. So people might like to have a large southern fleet, and whether that is all 100% prototypical or not, I think I could see them being popular. And if they did a Caledonian, the Caledonian Smoky Joe Pokes in a proper Caledonian livery, I for one would buy it, even if it did cost an extra £10, just because I think the livery is really nice.
It could almost become a range to itself, like one above, like the Railroad, probably would still come under the Railroad banner, but just with some like ornate liveries on them, because people like a little novelty loco when a locomotive's got like a different livery to it that's interesting. Maybe somebody is, say, a SECR modeler and the pug comes up in an SECR livery, then I think a lot of people would be tempted to go for it because it's different and it fits in for what they like, but it's also different to what they've seen before. And people like a little novelty.
They certainly do. And if you want to hear more about novelties, check out our Novelty or Not podcast. Here we go. That plug lined up perfectly. That wasn't even planned,
It wasn't.
It wasn't. But I think this could work really nicely. And it might be a good collection point as well if people collected a line of them. Now, you would have to get over the lack of prototypical kind of reasoning behind them. But once you got over that, I think they'd be good big sellers, and they would bridge the market as well. Bridge the gap in market for that.
I'd love to see any of them in North Staffs, if I'm being completely honest.
I knew you were going to say that.
They could take my money straight away if they announced that.
Hear that, Hornby? Do a North Staffs little pug and you can take all of his money. As much as you want, probably. Any other things we want to add?
Just one note that somebody popped in on the Instagram. So thank you for everybody who did get involved. I've kind of had to cherry pick some of them that just kind of fit with the Discord that we've had. But somebody mentioned BR Black. Now, I think they were talking about steam locomotives, just going off speaking to him and that. But do you think BR Black diesels are underrepresented?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think they were that common in prototype, but I do think there is definitely a gaping hole where they should be. Because, let's be honest, a lot of the early diesel shunts in particular, did appear in BR Black initially. That was before kind of BR Green and that sort of wasp stripes were introduced. And I think I could see them being quite a popular, maybe a unique kind of twist to someone's diesel fleet.
Definitely.
Right. Well, I think we've kind of concluded all of our thoughts and all our notes. So, as we did mention at the beginning of this pod, we have just launched our first ever model railway kit range in double O gauge. Now, if you like wagons that will suit a pre-grouping, grouping, and nationalisation era, then check out our Shoulder wagon. We're offering that at £8 at the moment, so it's quite good value. It comes with wheels and all that kind of stuff. Good to go. We're also offering some detailing parts. Again, quite competitively priced and ready to go. So if you like that, check down the link for our eBay store. And it's a great way to support the channel. It's a great way for you to get something out of it as well. You're not just dropping a couple pennies in a Patreon account, you're getting a model railway kit back from it, as well as supporting the channel and helping us grow, which is something we're really hoping to do. So thanks for watching, and hopefully we will see you soon with whatever podcast comes out next. All right, stay safe.
Peace.